You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Hello, sports fans! Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am the Jacob Valk, and you're not. At the end of this show, you're going to get the interview that I did with Brian Martin, the author of Barney Dreyfuss, Pittsburgh's baseball titan. Had a lot of fun talking to him. But I got to start with a team that Brian actually hates. And I didn't know that until I talked to him yesterday. I'm not starting with this because he hates them. I'm starting with them because they are the biggest story. That is the Yankees. It's one thing to lose. It's another thing to lose and to see your second best player leave with an injury. That's what happened to the Yankees. Garrett Cole didn't make it through 4 innings yesterday. He had to leave with left hamstring tightness. You watch the clip, you don't see anything with his hamstring, but that's what the Yankees announced it as, so that's what it is. I mean, this was a game that the Yankees really needed Cole to be great. The Yankees were in free fall. 2-7 in their last 9. They had lost 3 straight. You'd like to gain a little bit of distance between yourself and the Red Sox. The Red Sox are going up against the Rays. Odds are the Rays are going to win. So if the Yankees win, they get a little distance on the Red Sox so they can play the wild card game in the Bronx rather than at Fenway Park. Instead, Cole doesn't make it through 4 innings. He gives up 5 hits, only strikes out 2. His velocity wasn't where it usually is. His breaking stuff wasn't as effective. And the Yankees looked dead to the world yesterday. They had 8 hits. All of them were singles. You know how many walks they got? None. The Yankees looked absolutely lifeless out there. I mean, this is starting to remind me of 2015. If you'll recall, the Yankees backed into the playoffs and got shut out by the Astros at the stadium. Dallas Keuchel pitched great. The Yankees were terrible in that game. I got sick for it. Thank you, immune system. I'm not being sarcastic, by the way. I'm glad that I didn't go to that game. That's what this team is reminding me of. They're going to back into the playoffs. Maybe they'll beat the Red Sox because the Red Sox aren't world beaters. I don't want to say it's a formality, but I will pick the Yankees in that game. The thing is, though, that means that the Yankees go up against the Rays in the ALDS. The Yankees would get destroyed by the Rays. So it's another ALDS exit. Aaron Boone has been here for 4 years. In 3 of those years, the Yankees have been eliminated in the ALDS, assuming the Yankees lose to the Rays in a month. You may be thinking to yourself, oh, Jacob, you're getting too far ahead of yourself. We've still got a lot of baseball left to play. I understand that, but right now the Yankees look like a completely different team than the team they were just a few weeks ago. I mean, realize, not that long ago, they were on a 13-game winning streak. They weren't even sniffing the playoffs. Then you fast forward to the end of the streak. The Yankees are in a great position to make the playoffs. You think to yourself, to hell with seeding, the Yankees can beat any team in baseball right now. Now they look like a completely different team. They look like the team that in early July I said, don't reinforce, don't trade prospects. Sell, sell, sell. And what's funny about that is, you think about their big trade deadline moves, only one is worked out, and that's Rizzo. Rizzo has been everything you could hope for with the Yankees. I love him. I want him back with the team. Everyone else has been a major disappointment. Joey Gallow is hitting 130 with the Yankees. You want to tell me he's getting on base at a solid clip? No, he's not. With the Yankees, his on-base percentage is .291. He has a .325 slugging percentage. That's not going to get the job done. This guy was hitting second. And he strikes out every damn game. And you've got Gallow saying, I'm not going to change my approach for anyone. This is who I am. Well, who you are sucks. Andrew Heaney was so bad with the Yankees, they had to move him into the bullpen. He's the freaking mop-up guy. This team looks lifeless. This team looks inept. And make no mistake about it, there's no guarantee that they're going to make the playoffs. They're only 2.5 games up on the Blue Jays, 3.5 games up on the Mariners, and 4 games up on the Athletics. It's not impossible to think that the Yankees could blow this. I mean, for God's sake, you lose a series to the freaking Orioles? If you can't beat the Orioles, what chance do you have against a team like the Red Sox or the Rays? I mean, the Athletics were that team that the Yankees overtook during their epic win streak. You know why they overtook the Athletics? A, because they were winning, but B, because the Athletics' best pitcher, Chris Bassett, got hurt. If this injury to Garrett Cole is serious, and granted it doesn't seem like it is, but we don't know for sure yet, if it turns out to be serious, there goes the season. If there was one guy on the Yankees that was irreplaceable, it was Garrett Cole. The Yankees don't have the pitching depth to withstand his loss. Here's a guy who's one of, if not the best pitcher in baseball. You take a look at every other starter on the Yankees, they're not even in the top 20. Probably not even the top 30. Jameson Taillon is okay. Not great. Jordan Montgomery's really good. I have no complaints with him, but he's not an ace. Since coming back, Corey Kluber hasn't set the world on fire. Nestor Cortez isn't an ace. See, here's the thing. The reason why I would pick the Yankees in a one-game playoff over any team in baseball is because you know that the Yankees would manipulate their rotation so that Gerrit Cole would start that game. And in a playoff game, there are very few pitchers I want on the mound over Gerrit Cole. It's Madison Bumgarner, Christy Mathewson, and that may be it. If Cole doesn't start that game, for whatever reason, the Red Sox win it, or the Blue Jays win it, or the Mariners win it, or the Athletics win it. The formula for the Yankees winning that game is for Gerrit Cole to pitch like 7 innings of fantastic baseball. There's no one else on the Yankees that I have faith in to do that. This is what you signed Cole for moments like this. To win a one-game playoff to get you in the ALDS. If he doesn't pitch that game, and I'm not saying he won't, but if he doesn't, the Yankees will lose that game. You know, I don't want to come off as the harbinger of doom. I understand that we have a lot of baseball left. I understand that the Yankees are in the driver's seat right now. But you'd be hard-pressed to find any Yankees fan right now that's confident in this team. See, here's the thing. The best-case scenario for this team is an ALDS exit. Is that acceptable? The answer is no. 3 out of 4 years you get bounced in the freaking ALDS back-to-back years by a team with a fraction of your payroll? That doesn't work for me. You know, I've seen some people say that the Yankees peaked too soon. That the 13-game winning streak, in essence, was a bad thing. No, that's not what this is. You gotta realize something. After the Field of Dreams game, and even through the day after, because if you'll recall, the Yankees had an off day to travel from Dyersville, Iowa to Chicago, Illinois, the Yankees were out of the playoffs. They were 2.5 games behind the Red Sox for the second wildcard spot. Fast forward to the end of the winning streak, the Yankees are 3 games up on the Red Sox for the top wildcard spot. Now, I understand that the Yankees are 2-8 since that point. They've actually been the worst team in the American League since their 13th straight win. And think about how they won those 2 games. The last game of the Angels series was a Herculean performance by Cole. The second game was an 11-inning walk-off win against the Orioles. I don't want to say those wins didn't give you confidence, but it's not like the Yankees were clicking on all cylinders winning 10-0 games. The win streak got the Yankees back into a playoff spot. It didn't guarantee them a playoff spot. You can't tell me that it's a guarantee that the Yankees are going to make the playoffs. I think they will, but it's not 100% certainty. I'm going to say it right now. If the Yankees don't make it further than the ALDS, fire Cashman and Boone. even if they make it to the ALCS, but then get creamed, you may want to fire them too. But if they get eliminated in the ALDS or worse, they need to go regardless of anything. It's just that simple. I brought up the Mariners a little earlier. They went up against the Houston Astros yesterday and lost to the Cheaters 5-4 in 10 innings. They were up 4-2 entering the bottom of the ninth. Paul Sewald blew the game, sent it to extras, and Johan Ramirez gave up an RBI double to Carlos Correa. That's not why I want to talk about this game, though. I want to talk about this game because Jake Odorizzi got pulled after just 5 innings. He had thrown 66 pitches. Through 5 innings, he had only given up 2 runs, just 5 hits. He was pitching well. Granted, in the 5th, it got a little shaky. He gave up a 2 RBI double to J.P. Crawford. But still, you've got to think that Odorizzi is coming out for the 6th, maybe even the 7th. His pitch count was low enough. No, Dusty Baker pulled him. He finished the game with 5 relievers throwing an inning each. Yimi Garcia, Phil Maton, Kendall Graveman, Ryan Presley, and Ryan Stanek. After the game, Odorizzi did not hide his feelings. He said, honestly, I think it's BS. And he didn't use the acronym. At the end of the day, the Astros won this game, so you can't get too upset. I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, but this does speak to a big issue in baseball. The fact that these managers can't wait to get into the bullpen. They're like kids on Christmas running to the tree to unwrap their presents. I mean, Baker usually is the kind of guy to ride his starter. He's an old school manager. Instead, he's going to pull his guy after just 66 pitches to get into a bullpen that, in all fairness, really didn't do its job? Why do you go to a bullpen? To shut the door, to stop the bleeding, to keep the deficit where it is. The Astros bullpen really didn't do that yesterday. They pitched 5 innings and gave up 2 runs. It's not because of the Astros bullpen that they won that game. They won that game because of Alex Bregman and Carlos Correa. Also, the Astros bullpen this year hasn't been great. It has a 4.08 ERA. It's got some good pitchers in it, there's no question, but is it really the kind of bullpen that you should be running to if you're the manager? I mean, I know that this is like trying to ride a canoe in the opposite direction of the current, but I just hate that these managers are so desperate to get into the bullpen. It just seems like every game you see these managers giving their starter the hook before they really need to. I'm not asking for 20 complete games a season, but 100 pitches? I think that's fair. If the guy is dealing, let him go. This third time through the order nonsense is a joke to me. So let me get this straight. I've proven as a starter that I can get these guys out, but just because I'm facing them for the third time, I'm not going to get the chance to do it again because I did my job. I'm not going to get a chance to pitch more. It's one thing if the starter got killed by the top of the order. It's another thing if he really didn't. I just hate it. I hate it. Jake Odorizzi has every right to be upset. In fact, if I'm Dusty Baker, I'm glad that he's upset. You want to tell me he shouldn't publicly second-guess his manager? Okay. I'm with you there, but think about why he's second-guessing his manager. It's because he wants to stay in the game and pitch more. It's not like the guy had thrown 120 pitches and his arm was ready to fall off. Or he had been shellacked and wanted to stay in. No, the guy had pitched 5 innings of 2-run ball and had thrown just 66 pitches. He had every right to be upset. He had every right to want to stay in that game. I don't blame Odorizzi at all for being upset. Alright, now I'll give you some NFL Valk talk. And I'll start with the Texans trading Bradley Roby to the Saints. We don't know what the Texans are getting in exchange, but presumably it's for a pick or two in day 3. I'd be surprised if it was anything more. This is a great move for the Saints. They needed corners desperately. You take a look at their cornerback group. It's Ken Crawley, Marshawn Lattimore, Desmond Trufant, and Paulson Adebo. It's almost as bad as the Jets cornerback core. Now you add Roby to that group, let me tell you, he instantly becomes their best corner. According to Pro Football Focus, last year he had a 71.5 overall grade. He's been a really good corner in this league for a long time. I understand that he's going to miss week 1 because he's still serving a 6-game suspension for using PEDs. But you know what? I'll live with it for a game. This is an outstanding move for the Saints. It makes a ton of sense. The Jets should have done it. I mean, there's no question that the Texans just got infinitely worse. But they really don't care. They've been content to throw this season away for a while now. So get another pick or two. It'll help with the rebuild. I can't fault the Texans for this trade, but the Saints easily win it. They get the best player in the deal. I'd be surprised if they gave up an arm and a leg. He fills a huge need for him. Outstanding job by the Saints. Moving on now to the Vikings, signing Brian O'Neill to a 5-year extension worth $92.5 million. That's $18.5 million per year. In terms of total value and AAV, he is now the second highest paid right tackle in the NFL behind just Ryan Ramczyk. And you know what? O'Neill deserves that honor. This guy is without question one of the most underrated players in the NFL. He's gotten better every year he's been in the league. According to Pro Football Focus, last year he had a 78 overall grade. And he's still young. He's going to turn 26 in a week. So happy birthday, Mr. O'Neill. Here's a contract that makes you the second highest paid right tackle in the league. I mean, now think about that O-line. Christian Darrisaw, when he comes back, Ezra Cleveland, Garrett Bradbury, Wyatt Davis, and Brian O'Neill. That has the potential to be one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. Kirk Cousins has to be doing backflips. The Vikings have all these guys locked up long term. It's put up or shut up time for the Vikings. Okay? They spent a bunch of money to sign Cousins. They really haven't accomplished much. But they have some really good pieces around him. If the Vikings don't make the playoffs this year, Mike Zimmer needs to go. He's just not the right coach for that team. Do I think they make the playoffs? You'll have to tune in tomorrow for my NFL season preview to find out. I do need to talk about a really sad death in the football world. That, of course, is the passing of Sam Bam Cunningham, who died yesterday at the age of 71. Think about the best players in Patriots history. The best quarterback is Tom Brady. The best wide receiver is either Julian Edelman or Wes Welker. The best tight end is Rob Gronkowski. The best defensive player is probably Vince Wilfork. The best coach is Bill Belichick. The best owner is Robert Kraft. What do all these guys have in common? They're part of the Patriots dynasty from the 2000s to the late 2010s. But you'll notice that I skipped a position. I skipped running back. That's because even though the Patriots during the dynasty had some really good running backs, Antoine Smith, Corey Dillon, Lawrence Maroney, Stevan Ridley, etc., in terms of looking at what they did for the Patriots, it pales in comparison to what Cunningham did for the Patriots. He is, without question, the best running back in Patriots history. All-time leader in rushing attempts, all-time leader in rushing yards. He's 2 touchdowns behind Jim Nantz for the all-time lead. And just for whatever it's worth, Jim Nantz finished his career with the Jets. Cunningham didn't do that. He spent his entire career with the Patriots. Something that no one else besides Edelman did out of all the guys who I mentioned. Think about it. Brady's a Buccaneer. Gronk is a Buccaneer. Wes Welker played for a bunch of other teams. Vince Wilfork finished his career with the Texans. Cunningham stayed loyal to the Patriots. Give him credit. He went to college at USC and was absolutely incredible there. In his first year with the Trojans, he joined quarterback Jimmy Jones and running back Clarence Davis. Cunningham was a fullback to form the first all-black backfield in D1 history. Cunningham's first game was in Birmingham against the Crimson Tide. Not exactly the kind of place you want to be when you're a black man making civil rights history, but Cunningham didn't let that faze him. He rushed for 135 yards and 2 touchdowns. USC beat Alabama 42-21. That performance was a big part of Alabama and other southern schools integrating. In 1972, Cunningham was a first-team All-American. He rushed for 13 touchdowns. USC went 12-0. They destroyed OSU in the Rose Bowl 42-17 to become national champions. Cunningham scored 4 touchdowns in that game. That is still a Rose Bowl record. The Patriots took him with the 11th overall pick. They really needed a running game after seeing Jim Nantz leave. Cunningham didn't have a good rookie season, but by his sophomore year, you could tell that he had the makings of being a really good player in this league. Unfortunately for Cunningham, while he was producing as a running back, the Patriots had some lean years. That is until 1976, when the Patriots went 11-3. They made the playoffs, but they lost to the Raiders 24-21 in the divisional round. The Patriots blew a 21-10 fourth quarter lead. For his part, Cunningham had 20 carries for 68 yards and 2 catches for 14 yards. So not a bad performance for your playoff debut. The year after that, Cunningham had his best season. He carried the ball 270 times. The Patriots didn't want to put a lot on Steve Grogan's plate that year. Cunningham had 1,015 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns that year. The year after that, the Patriots won the AFC East for the first time in franchise history. Cunningham carried the ball 199 times for 768 yards and 8 touchdowns. He made his only Pro Bowl that year. Unfortunately for the Patriots, they got destroyed by the Oilers 31-14 in the divisional round. Cunningham had just 10 carries for 42 yards in that game. He did have 3 catches for 28 yards. The reason that he didn't have a big workload was because the Patriots fell behind quickly. So what do you do when you fall behind quickly? You throw the ball a lot. That 78 Patriots team was a very special team, though. Cunningham, Horace Ivory, Andy Johnson, Steve Grogan, and others combined for 3,165 rushing yards as a team. That was an NFL record. It stood until 2019 when the Ravens broke it. After that, Cunningham kind of fell off. Cunningham was solid in 79, but the Patriots were moving away from him in favor of Don Calhoun and Horace Ivory. In 1980, he had a contract dispute with the Patriots that resulted in him missing the entire 80 season. When he came back, he was a shell of his former self. His last year was the strike-shortened season of 1982. The Patriots lost to the Dolphins 28-13 in the wild card round. Cunningham didn't even get into the game. But make no mistake about it, Sam Cunningham is the best running back in Patriots history. It's not even close. He was on their 50th anniversary team in 2009. In 2010, he was inducted into the New England Patriots and College Football Halls of Fame. May he rest in peace. Alright, here's my interview with Brian Martin. You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I'm Jacob Valk, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Brian Martin, the author of Barney Dreyfuss, Pittsburgh's baseball titan. Brian, how are you?
I'm very well, Jacob. Thanks for asking.
Oh, of course. So, how did Dreyfus earn his money?
2 words: hard work. Barney Dreyfuss came as an immigrant. He was born in Germany, in one of the duchies, Baden, in Germany, in 1865. And by the time he was about 18, he was induced to come to America by a cousin who was involved in a distillery, a bourbon distillery in Paducah, Kentucky, along the Ohio River. And his cousin was doing very well. His cousin and his cousin's brother, I guess both cousins, were doing quite well. And they needed somebody who was good with numbers. And Barney was working in Karlsruhe, Germany, in a bank as a low-level clerk. And he liked the idea of the excitement of going to America. His father had been in Kentucky, just up the river a little bit from Paducah for a few years, but that had gone back to Germany. And so Barney had heard some stories about America, land of opportunity, that sort of thing. And when his cousins were needing somebody who was good with numbers to work the books in their distillery, which was doing very, very well, they were doing exceptionally well. They had a trade over a wide area, and they induced Barney to come, and he got in on pretty well on the bottom level of a growing concern, and he did very well, and the distillery did so well that the Bernheim brothers moved it to Louisville, and in Louisville they came up with the I.W. Harper brand of bourbon that some people may be familiar with, which was quite popular, and they became quite a going concern and were one of the largest distillers in the area. And Barney, meanwhile, had been given advancements and moved his way up to be the top financial guy, and was doing extremely well. And along the way in Paducah and then later in Louisville, he discovered baseball, and that became his. It eventually became the business that he got into. But he started in the liquor business, and as I say, it worked out pretty well for him.
That's how a lot of the early baseball owners first earned their money. That's how Colonel Jacob Rupert earned his money, a bunch of other guys, not worth getting into all of them, but that's how a lot of early baseball owners earned their money through the liquor business. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. The American Association was known as the Beer and Whiskey League because, you had Chris Vondraw, who was a saloon owner. A lot of these people were distillers or brewers. Cincinnati was famous for it. And Sunday baseball and alcohol were a big part of early baseball, leading to its early success when some of the powers that were behind the National League didn't want Sunday baseball, didn't want beer in the ballparks, and the American Association came on strong as the Beer and Whiskey League and really changed the nature of the experience of going to the ballpark. And had it not been for alcohol and those who owned alcohol interests, baseball might not have become the professional sport it did.
Can you imagine watching a baseball game without vendors selling beer? Because I have a hard time imagining that.
Well, for a time they didn't even sell hot dogs. Harry Stevens got into that. I think the pressure was on the owners of baseball teams back in the late 1800s to make it a going business proposition. That was not a given. They didn't have food concessions in the ballparks. They didn't have alcohol for the most part. And that whether baseball was ever going to become a successful business was very, very much in doubt for the longest time. And teams were, like Barney's team he got involved in Louisville, they couldn't draw flies to the ballpark, and eventually they got squeezed out of the National League. And a number of teams, Kansas City, there were all sorts of teams that expired along the way because they simply couldn't make it pay. They were trying to squeeze pay for players. They were trying to maximize their profits. They were trying to minimize travel. They were doing everything they could to squeeze a nickel out of baseball. And it wasn't until they realized that it's more than just the game. It's a baseball experience of going there and maybe grabbing a bite and maybe grabbing a beer and maybe going on Sundays, which at first the Puritans didn't care for. And into that mix, Barney Dreyfuss sort of showed up, and he was one of the people that had a view that baseball definitely could be a paying proposition. Other owners weren't so sure. Baseball parks were built of wood and frame, and they were burning down. Two of his ballparks in Louisville burned to the ground. Barney Dreyfuss was the second by only a few months, the first in the National League, but second in professional baseball, to erect a concrete and steel stadium, Forbes Field, opened in 1909, just a few months after Scheib Field or Scheib Park in Philadelphia, because he believed that it was a paying proposition. It didn't need to be temporary, like wooden stands and that sort of thing. I'm going to put money into it. We're going to invest in the game, and because I have confidence that it's going to pay in the long run. And his confidence was the greatest thing about Barney Dreyfuss. His confidence that baseball could be a paying proposition. It was a while before they had Sunday games in Pittsburgh, and he never really cottoned on to radio. They broadcast a few games there, but he never was. He died in 1932, and he still wasn't sure about broadcasting baseball games. He didn't like the idea of giving away for free something that he was charging people in the stands for. So he wasn't exactly forward-thinking in terms of radio, but in terms of all the other parts of the game, he was a real visionary.
Right, absolutely. So why did Dreyfus buy the Louisville Colonels?
Well, he fell in love with baseball in Paducah, and he actually played a bit of second base. But he found his real talent was in managing and organizing, and he was a manager, and he found talent, and he kept what they called a dope book, which was a little booklet. He kept all the names of players that he was impressed with or had heard about, and he was able at a very early stage, before even going to Louisville, he was very, very good at finding some players. George Dovey, Will Dovey, the Dovey brothers, who eventually, the surviving brother eventually bought Boston later on, terrific ball players, and others. Hannes Wagner, he got in 1897. He was able to find talent, identify and pay talent, and then the talent, he was loyal to them, and he expected loyalty back, and for the most part, he got it. was a guy who just had a sense of what the game was about, even though as a boy in Germany he'd never seen a game. But he really fell in love with the game, and he found an opportunity. Louisville was struggling. They were having real trouble making ends meet, and he got in when they were really struggling and became president, and financially he was involved at first, and eventually he said, well, this is we're going to make a go of this. But then when the National League tried to squeeze Louisville out, he found an opportunity, and he bought into Pittsburgh and eventually turned the Pittsburgh Pirates into a real powerhouse. And in the course of his ownership, they won the World Series twice, and he actually, with Pittsburgh, he in 1903 he challenged the American League champions in what is considered the first World Series, the Boston Pilgrims. Now, he lost that one, but he won in 1909 against the Detroit Tigers, and then in 1925 against the Washington Senators. So he was able to spot talent, believed the game of baseball could be a paying proposition, and he eventually had made enough money in the liquor business that he put all his resources into baseball, and he died a very wealthy man because he made some very good decisions.
Yeah, we'll get into the World Series and the success of the Pirates a little later, but I want to stick with the Colonels for a little bit longer.
Sure.
What can you tell us about Dreyfus's relationship with Harry Pulliam?
Oh, that's a very interesting story. Harry became involved with the Colonels, Barney, and he were very, very close, very good friends. Harry had worked for the newspaper in Louisville and had covered the team, and but Barney liked what Harry did. People liked Harry Pulliam. He was a flashy dresser, and a very likable fellow, a little more sensitive than perhaps he should have been, but he did very, very well, and Barney and he became a bit of a team, and they did the best they could with the Louisville Colonels, and the two men saw eye to eye on everything. Now, eventually, I don't want to get ahead of us here, but eventually they had a falling out, but that was not until they were both connected in Pittsburgh, and Harry was head of the National League at the time, but I don't want to get ahead of Louisville.
That's quite all right. Talking to Brian Martin, the author of Barney Dreyfuss, Pittsburgh's baseball titan. So, how did Dreyfus, for lack of a better word, consolidate the Colonels into the Pittsburgh Pirates? I know consolidate may not be the best word, but it's the best word I have to describe it.
Well, he got a deal whereby he could buy into the Pirates, and the fellow who was selling it was getting tired of being criticized for not producing a winner in Pittsburgh. A guy named W.W. Kerr, who was involved in coffee, who was known as the Coffee King, and he liked being called the Colonel or something like that, and the Captain, and he was getting a little tired of taking the abuse and that sort of thing. And Barney Dreyfuss showed up because he realized that the handwriting was on the wall for the Louisville. They just couldn't get enough fans to come out to the ballpark, and then the ballparks kept burning down. Barney spotted an opportunity to acquire some shares in the Pittsburgh team, and then as time went on, he realized that, oh yeah, it looks like Louisville's in real trouble. So what he did is he managed to work a deal whereby the major stars of the Louisville Colonels, who included Hannes Wagner, he managed to sell them to Pittsburgh, basically to himself. It took away the talent from Louisville because he knew the team was destined to be cut out of the league and go on its own. And he managed to bring the leading lights from there. There wasn't just Wagner, there were others, but he brought them over to Pittsburgh in sort of a package deal. This got the people in Louisville a little bit upset, but it really gave him an instant competitive team over in Pittsburgh, which hadn't existed before.
Right. So, how did Dreyfus help create the World Series?
Well, Barney loves baseball, and he thought the season ended too soon, and he won the National League championship in 1903, and he came up with this idea. A guy named Henry, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, Kilea, Killalea, and it was an Irish name.
You're asking the wrong guy.
Okay.
I can't pronounce names to save my life.
Well, I could spell it, but I can't pronounce it. Anyway, he was the owner of the Boston Pilgrims, and as the season went on, it looked like both Pittsburgh was going to win the National League and Boston was going to win the American League. And season wasn't quite over, but it looked like everything was going to be, they were going to be the respective champions. Well, he got a hold of the owner of Boston, and the two of them worked it out that, well, we'll have a postseason series. We don't need to end baseball, quite so soon. We'll challenge each other and see who the better team will win, and the glory will go to the National League or the American League, and we can say that we're world champions. Well, in fact, they did play, and Barney unfortunately lost. The Boston Pilgrims won. It was known as sort of the World's Championship back then. The term World Series wasn't really very common, so they called it the World Championship. And Barney lost that, but after it, people saw, the other members of the other leagues saw that, there was potential here for further revenue at the end of the season, and still baseball was not a particularly well-paying proposition. So they figured this was an additional bit of revenue they could get once the regular season was over. And Barney, even though he lost, he took all his owner's share of the proceeds and gave them to his players because he was so happy that they had a good season end and that they'd done a pretty good job trying to win the World Championship. So he was very generous and he was very happy that it worked out. Now, 1904, because of the ejection of John McGraw in New York, who they had won that year, they didn't want to play the other league because they felt it would be, elevating the other league, that we're the superior league. And so there was no World Series in 1904, but by 1905 it came into existence in a formal way, and with various wrinkles. It's been going on ever since. But Barney saw the opportunity to cash in. We've given two leagues to have a sort of a championship to decide who the super champion was. And even though it was his idea primarily, and he didn't win, it became something that people took notice and said, "Oh, that's a good idea. We should keep doing that." So Barney Dreyfuss was an innovator in baseball in many ways, but his decision to try to start a postseason series is one that the wisdom, looking back on it, the World Series is the World Series, but it hadn't been thought of until he came up with it, along with the fellow from Henry, from the Boston Pilgrims.
Yeah, that's his name, Henry. What's his name? Good old.
Yeah, it's like Killalea,
Killalea, something along those lines.
Killalea or something. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, the 03 World Series, best of 9. Everything else, best of 7. I always wondered why they chose best of 9. Do you know why?
Well, there was actually an earlier World Series that took place between the champions of the American Association. I wrote a book about the Detroit Wolverines. They were in the National League from 1881 to 1887. And in 1885, there was a best of 15 series for the World Championship. Still wasn't called the World Series then. It was a best of 15 series, and they had to play all 15 games, regardless of who was ahead after 8 games. I mean, so there have been various combinations of ways to play postseason series. And I think the 15-game series of 1887, I stand corrected, and it was played in a number of cities, and at the very last game, I think, was played back in St. Louis, and because it was so cold by the end of October, there was only something like about 600 people there. So I think the lesson they learned from that is 15 games is too many. So as with many wrinkles of the game, like the pitching distance and all sorts of other things, they were working things out on the fly, and eventually we got to the modern World Series.
So can you lay out the construction of Forbes Field?
Well, okay. Actually, it was he decided in December of 1908 that the time was right to replace Exposition Park, which was the one right beside the river on the north side in Allegheny City. It kept getting flooded by the Allegheny River, and there were times they played games in water that was up to the calf of some of the players, and they joked about part of the outfield was Lake Dreyfus. It was also a bad part of town, the Red Light District. And Barney thought he wanted baseball to become a family thing, so he thought it was a bad place because of the flooding, but also because of the red light district and trying to get a better crowd. So he found land. He looked all over, and he found land out in the Oakland area of Pittsburgh, which was to the east. It's out where the University of Pittsburgh is. And he found some land there that was basically being used for farming. And even though it was a fair distance from downtown, 4 or 5 miles as I recall, 3 or 4 miles, and he decided that was going to be the site. It was in an area that was sort of the cultural and educational district of the city, and very leafy and not industrial, away from the steel plants. And it was a couple of, not ferries, but trolley rides to get out there. It was serviced by trolleys. And he picked the site, and in December, construction started, and it was completed by the end of June. And they played the first game, I think, very end of June or early July. And it was the first of the National League's concrete and steel baseball parks, seated about 25,000. And it was a real showpiece. The guy who designed it normally did racetracks, and it was his first baseball park, and he did a really nice job on it. And he looked at places like Shibe Park in Philly, which opened just a few months earlier, and it was the very first concrete and steel baseball park in professional baseball. And Barney's Forbes Field was just behind it. Forbes Field, they had to do an awful lot of leveling. There was a ravine in the deep right field that they had to fill in, and there were some problems with extending the right field stands because of topographical issues. But he eventually got the thing built, and it was about $1 million, and it was his money. It wasn't today, entrepreneurs like to get cities and states to pay for ballparks. Well, Barney paid for this one himself. And then it was state of the art because he had ramps. Until that time, people had to go upstairs and stuff. This was ramps, so the large numbers of people could get in and out of the stadium quickly. They said it could be vacated in something like 10 minutes or something in the event of an emergency. Ramps were the ways to move people in large numbers in multi-layered places. He had elevators, which was unusual in a ballpark. He had telephones. He had dressing rooms, and he had all sorts of fancy parts, boxes for affluent owners or affluent attendees who could attend and pay for a box, and it was another source of revenue for him. He was a real visionary. He was way ahead of his time, and a lot of people looked at that ballpark, as well as Shibe Park in Philadelphia, and said, yeah, this looks like the future of ballparks. And then, 1912, you have Fenway come along, and there's a whole series of ballparks that these two ballparks inspired, and there were no more wooden ballparks after a time because this was the way forward, because by then, baseball was going to be a paying proposition because of people like Barney Dreyfuss's contribution to the game.
Yeah, no question about that. And obviously, I never watched a game in Forbes Field, but from what I've read, it is was a beautiful ballpark, great place to watch a game. There's no question that Dreyfus did a fantastic job developing that ballpark.
Well, I have been to Pittsburgh a number of times, and I've been to PNC Park. I never got to Forbes Field. I mean, it was gone by 1970, but people still talk about Forbes Field. There's a whole website about it. It's made an impression on Pittsburgh people that lasts to this day. And, the outfield wall is still there, and people go there in pilgrimages. And, in October, they have the reliving of the broadcast of the 1960 World Series that they won, and a lot of people go and relive the glory days of Forbes Field. There's a place inside one of the adjacent buildings, which is on the campus of Pittsburgh University, where the home plate is. They've preserved that. It's very much a part of the history of Pittsburgh. People love that ballpark, even though there's only a couple of remnants and a couple of plaques that remain from it. And I wish I had been able to see a game there because I've seen a lot of old film, and I've seen an awful lot lot of photographs. And I don't know if you've seen that. My favorite photograph in all of baseball is the one from the 1960 World Series that's taken from atop the Cathedral of Learning, which is about a 24-story building on the campus of Pittsburgh University, just beside the park. And there's all these students up there on the top, very top of this building, and they got their arms up and they're cheering. And way down, 25 stories or so below, it's Forbes Field, and they're playing the World Series. And it's the most spectacular photograph. It was in, I think it was in Life magazine, and the name of the photographer escapes me now, but it is just a lovely image of Forbes Field and the attachment that people in Pittsburgh had for it.
Yeah, now Yankees fans really don't do a lot of research into the 1960 World Series. We try to forget that happened.
I can understand why. What a terrific! I've seen that game, the highlights of that game, over and over and over and over. And Mazeroski's hit there at the end was that ended the game was just absolutely fantastic. And I've never been to Yankee Stadium. I got to be honest, but I've been to Pittsburgh and PNC a number of times. I think it's a great ballpark, but from everything I've read or seen or heard, nothing will ever compare to Forbes Field.
Yeah, PNC Park is nice. I was there to watch a game once. Very, very nice place to watch a ballpark. I wish I had gotten a chance to explore that further.
The backdrop is just spectacular. There isn't a bad seat. There isn't a bad seat in that park. And the best part about it is before the game, the bridge right beside it is called the Roberto Clemente Bridge, and they shut it to traffic, and it becomes a pedestrian concourse from downtown across the Allegheny River right into the ballpark. And it's every game is like a festival there. It's people in Pittsburgh love their Pirates, and I feel so badly that they've struggled in recent years. I've met the president of the Pirates when we did put the gravestone marker up for Pud Galvin in Pittsburgh, and nice guy, and the people in Pittsburgh are terrific, and I just hope that they can get on the winning track again. And Barney Dreyfuss gave them winning baseball and sort of spoiled them for a long time. Excuse me, but it's as I say, it's a terrific place to see ball. But I love watching the old films of Forbes Field.
Raise the Jolly Roger, right, Brian?
Yeah, exactly.
Talking to Brian Martin, the author of Barney Dreyfuss, Pittsburgh's baseball titan. So why did Dreyfus think that having a commissioner of baseball was important?
Well, they had a three-member group called the National Commission. And the National Commission consisted of a chairman, August Herman, who was the owner of Cincinnati. You had Harry Pulliam, who was the president of the National League, and you had Van Johnson, the president of the American League. And as time went on, August Herman sort of sided most often with Van Johnson. Van Johnson was a very strong character, and Harry Pulliam for the National League was sort of overshadowed by him. Harry was a bit of a more sensitive character, but Van Johnson was a bit of a blustery sort of A-type personality, and it wasn't working very well. There were all sorts of issues about abuse of umpires and all sorts of things, failing to back the umpires in disputes with players and that sort of thing. And the National Commission really became rather ineffective, and a lot of people in the National League especially were upset that Pulliam was sort of overshadowed by the combination of Herman and Pulliam had been great friends, but Johnson seemed to hold sway, and things seemed to be going the American League way more often than the National League way. And Harry Pulliam got into a lot of stress about all this and eventually killed himself with the stress of the job. And it was a poor governance model, and there were a number of ideas that were floated about how to replace it, to get three independent commissioners that weren't, members of the leagues, or to have a single person come in as a commissioner and to be sort of the czar of baseball. Barney Dreyfuss liked the latter. After he sort of even himself became upset with Pulliam toward the end, and they had a major falling out, and that probably contributed to Pulliam's decision to end his life, because Barney and he had been so tight. But Barney liked the idea of a single person to oversee baseball, to be the final arbiter or the king of baseball. And they looked around and they found Kennesaw Mountain Landis. And Barney was one of the main owners of the National League, pushing for that sort of solution. And even though once Kennesaw Mountain Landis got in, he didn't side with Barney Dreyfuss too often, and Barney may have had second thoughts later on about the particular guy who's filling that position. But at one point, he was trying to see Landis about something, and Landis just brushed him off, and then, "I'll have nothing to do with you," he said, in effect. Anyway, Barney was, aside from the World Series innovations, he was very much behind and a key figure in the appointment of Kennesaw Mountain Landis as the commissioner of baseball. And it's a good thing he did, because one of the first things that Landis was stuck with was the Black Sox Scandal of 1919. And had they had the dithering threesome still there, one can only wonder what would have happened. Had strong measures not been taken by Landis, the public confidence in baseball might have faltered, and the whole idea of baseball as a viable proposition would be under assault, I'm convinced.
Oh, no question about that. Plus, what Landis did for that role, Commissioner of Baseball, executing his authority to ban all the Black Sox, cracking down on gambling, getting into it with Babe Ruth and Bob Musial over barnstorming, along with a bunch of other things, the minor league system, the list goes on and on. Kennesaw Mountain Landis really, for lack of a better word, set the tone of what the Commissioner of Baseball would do. Would you agree with that?
I agree. He was just a prescription of just what baseball needed. They needed strong leadership to deal with a number of these controversies that were undermining public confidence in the game. And, he was a judge. He was used to making taking decisions and then having them upheld. He was a very, very forceful personality, and he was extremely good for baseball. And Barney Dreyfuss is one of the reasons that Kennesaw Mountain Landis got that position, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Kennesaw Mountain Landis was without question the perfect choice to be baseball's first commissioner.
Absolutely.
Now you touched on this a little earlier, but I'd like you to go a little more in depth on it. How successful were the Pirates under Dreyfus?
Oh, well, he was known as First Division Barney for the longest time. He died in 1932, and he basically took over the Pirates in about 1900. And all but 2 or 3 years in that time frame, they were in the First Division. In other words, they were among the top teams in the National League. He as I say, they won the 1909 and 1925 World Series. They were runners-up to the Yankees in 27. But they were always a contender. They were always in the mix. You couldn't count the Pirates out. And, Pittsburgh is certainly not one of the larger cities in the States, but they pulled far beyond their weight in professional baseball because of the strong leadership that Barney Dreyfuss and the faith he had in his team. And the Pittsburgh fans to this day, there's a terrific legacy and a terrific pride in their accomplishments over the years, even though the last few have been a little thin. But he always fielded a very competitive product. He paid his players well, and he was loyal to them, and they were loyal back. He had Mooney Gibson, the great catcher, as well as Hannes Wagner. A number of players that played for him wouldn't want to play anywhere else, and they were just because he wanted to put a quality product on the field. A number of owners like Friedman in New York, they were just businessmen that were sort of playing with ball teams. They thought, it'll be something to just have a little fun on the side, and they never really put their time or resources into it. Barney hated losing, and he imparted that to his team. And he, when he lost the World Series in 1927 to the Yankees, he went to see Jacob Ruppert, and he could hardly stop from crying. He congratulated the Yankees on the win, but he was profoundly upset. He liked to win, and he gave Pittsburgh winning ball for just about every year that he was involved with the ball team.
Plus, all those players that the Pirates had back then, Obviously, they had Wagner. Obviously, they had Gibson. But Fred Clark, Deacon Phillips, Ruby Waddell, the Wainers, Burley Grimes, Kiki Kyler, et cetera, some of the greatest players in baseball history. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And everyone that's ever knew Barney, and guys like Lieb, the sports writer, talked about Barney in his dope book. He would hear about somebody's, or he'd look at the sporting press, Sporting Life, Sporting News, New York Clipper. He would jot down notes about players that he thought he'd like to pursue, and oftentimes it was just a quick reference in a publication to some player, and he would find a way to check him out when the team would be on the road, and he would travel with the team quite a bit. He seldom missed a game, but on the road he would go and try to check out other players that were in that area. And his dope book was his reference manual for all the players out there that he had heard about and wanted to check out. And he was an owner. He didn't leave the micromanaging to others. He actually got into it, and he just loved the game for itself. And that's what I appreciate about him. He wasn't a capitalist like the early gentlemen that were founders of the National League. They saw it as a way to make money. He really thoroughly loved baseball, and every decision he made, he did it to improve baseball, to make it a better experience for the players, for the fans. I mean, the spitball. He took steps to ban the spitball. He thought that was unfair, and was one of the major forces behind. It was grandfathered, but he was one of the people who was the leading people to ban it, because he thought it gave an unfair advantage to pitchers. As I say, he wasn't so keen about radio, which another innovation that he maybe missed the mark on. But for the most part,
hey, no one bats 1,000. No one bats 1,000, Brian. He's allowed to make at least one mistake.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. He did. He made a few, but they weren't huge, and they weren't many. But for the most part, his legacy is with us today. And to me, I was amazed that until I wrote a book on him, no one had done a book about Barney Dreyfuss. He was such a power in baseball. He's in the Baseball Hall of Fame, in the owners section. He was such a major player, mostly behind the scenes, and because Pittsburgh's a smaller city, he might not have had the, had he operated in New York or Los Angeles or certainly another Chicago, another major city, he might have been better known. But his legacy is that he made the game better, and he really, truly loved the game of baseball. And pretty good from a guy who didn't even come to America until I think he was 18, and had never seen a game of ball until then.
Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Now, something that a lot of people don't know is that Dreyfus was Jewish. Kind of interesting that we're conducting this interview during Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, which I celebrate. Did he experience any anti-Semitism as a major league owner?
I didn't detect that. There were a number of major league owners that were Jewish. I mean, Rupert in New York.
Right.
Friedman in New York. I'm hard pressed to think of any examples of anti-Semitism that he encountered. I'm not Jewish.
I'd rather the answer be no. That's good to hear.
Yeah, no, I would have. I spent a lot of time researching this, and I'm just trying to recall if there was anything that. No, I'm unaware of any. If I came across anything at all, it was minor, and I've forgotten it. It's been a little while since I did the major research on this, but I'm glad that I didn't find anything, and it doesn't seem to have been a factor.
Good. Talking to Brian Martin, the author of Barney Dreyfuss, Pittsburgh's baseball titan, and Brian, I'll get you out on this. Why did it take Dreyfus so long to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame?
Well, I get into that in the book. There was something in the 1930s, I think it was, called the Honor Roll, which only lasted a year or two. And it was sort of like almost the Hall of Fame, but not quite. And it was an experiment in honoring other contributors to the game. And he was among those people in the year or two that they actually had the Honor Roll around. And his family seemed to be, at the time, thinking that was Hall of Fame induction, but it wasn't. It was a sort of an experiment that didn't work out too well because, as others have said, if you're good enough to be in the Hall of Fame, you should be in the Hall of Fame. There shouldn't be a sort of a runner-up category.
Right.
And so for a long time, a lot of people sort of thought he was already there, but he wasn't, his family especially. And so that when he was actually inducted in 2008, some members of his family were a little bit insulted by it because they said, well, he's already in there. Well, he wasn't technically already in the Hall of Fame by then. Why so long? That's an excellent question. I think we tend to, in baseball, we tend to venerate people, big numbers, number of home runs, runs batted in, on-field performance, and some of the off-field personalities who were significant contributors to the game of baseball aren't as readily appreciated or as often appreciated as those who made a contribution with their glove or their bat or their pitching arm. And I think that's just the way, if you look at the category that he's in, which is the managers and owners, it's not that big a category.
Right.
Excuse me. And I think it was almost an oversight because he really contributed to the game in a fundamental way over a long number of years. I mean, one of the things he did early on was he was the scheduler. He could figure out schedules in his head. Van Johnson from the American League, when he met him and saw what Barney could do, if someone had a complaint with a schedule, he could alter it and fix the problem in a matter of minutes rather than days almost. And Van Johnson was marveled at this talent. And by being able to be an effective scheduler, he was able to help the teams make more money by making sure that their road trips made sense and to minimize the travel and the hotel stays and that sort of thing through the scheduling process. So he was able to help all the owners make money by intelligent scheduling, not moving somebody from one end of the geographical area to the other, too quickly, and having an orderly sort of movement of teams around. And so that was another way that he helped make baseball a paying proposition.
All right, Brian, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jacob. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right, that was Brian Martin. His book is Barney Dreyfuss, Pittsburgh's Baseball Titan. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro.
Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. Until tomorrow, I'm Jacob Valk. And always remember, if you disagree with me, you're wrong.